Welcome to the Pet Loss Companion. I'm Dolan-Del Vecchio, and I'm here with my friend and co-author and colleague, Nancy Saxton-Lopez. And this is a program that we do live on Facebook and YouTube every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And then it's available for replay on those outlets. And it's also available on a number of podcast outlets. And this is an opportunity to bring the work that we did and compiled into a book called The Pet Loss Companion, Healing Advice from Family Therapists Who Lead Pet Loss Groups, over many years, many decades, in fact. Particularly Nancy facilitated the group for 30 years. It's an opportunity to bring the understanding that we gained about how important it is in people's lives, how important our animal companions are to us, and how it strikes us when we lose them. And all the learning we got from people exchanging thoughts and feelings and recommendations to a larger audience. And so we are very happy to have you with us, whether you're listening to this or watching us live, or whether you're listening on one of the podcast outlets. And we very much like for this to be a dialogue. So please feel free to send us your questions, your stories, your recommendations for guests. And you can reach me at kenddv@gmail.com. You can reach Nancy at nsaxtonlopez. That's nsaxtonlopez at csmpc.com. Again, Nancy Saxton-Lopez at csmpc.com. We also like you to know that this program is a friend of Dakin Humane Society, which is in Springfield, Massachusetts. Dakin is a 501c3 community-supported animal welfare organization that provides shelter and medical care and spay-neuter services and behavioral rehab for more than 20,000 animals and people each year. And since it opened in 1969, Dakin has become one of the most recognized nonprofit organizations in central Massachusetts and a national leader in animal welfare. You can learn more about them and you can make a donation at dakinhumane.org. That's DAKINHUMANE.org. You can also make a donation to support the work that Nancy and I are doing in this podcast by clicking on the link that's attached in the description. And you can also help other people get access to the podcast by liking it on Facebook and also by subscribing on YouTube. So, did I forget anything?
I don't think so. I think we have everything. That's good. So tonight we were going to talk about grief and how it lingers or how it stays with us over a period of time. And it's individual for everyone. But it came to our discussion, Ken and I were discussing with a particular woman named Michelle, who we've been working with, conversing with actually for a few months off and on. And her cat, Tom, who was as she says, he was my world. He died almost 2 years ago. Was it 2 years? No, sorry. He died about a year ago, but he was only 2 years old. And she only had him for a very short period of time, a few months. However, he was sick. So through this, there are a lot of issues that come up through that grieving process, right? So she did adopt him being ill. So that's one issue, right? She had to spend a lot of time with him, take him to veterinarians, make sure he got his medications,
such an amazing thing to adopt an animal who has a health condition. It's such a generous thing to do. And I know you've done that as well.
Yes. Yeah. I have Boogie and there is a different level of responsibility almost, because they do depend on you to take care of that medical issue. But that's what it kind of like dealing with an animal that's sick. It kind of solidifies and enhances that bond, right? Because you are doing so much work with it.
It makes it so much more intimate, I think.
Exactly. There's much more time and emotional energy, that can go into caretaking. Now, the thing that happened, though, at one point after so many months of Tom being ill, was that there kind of became this traumatic ending, right?
Mhm.
Um, I do believe that he was very ill and she was trying to get him into a crate to take him to the ER.
Yep. Yep. And the vets had told her, you know, you gotta just, do whatever you need to do to
To get
to
him to get
grab
him
him
in.
and get him in the carrying case and get him over there, and he was hiding in a cabinet, I believe.
Yeah. And so she was panicked, of course, you would be panicked, right? You're anxious, you know he's very ill, you want to get him to the ER. So she was trying desperately to bring him out. And what happened is he kind of stumbled out and vomited, I believe, and he died.
Yeah.
So here is Michelle, and she's now so distraught and emotionally spent. I mean, and the anxiety, the the shock, the denial, the overwhelming feelings about being alone with Tom, who has now died.
And of
Immediate,
course, she felt a huge amount of guilt
yes,
and regret, even though, of course, she was trying to save his life.
yeah,
And that is so often the case that we're trying to get a hold of them because maybe they're hiding because a lot of times animals will seclude themselves
yeah.
when they're dying, when they're
Want to
very
die,
sick.
right?
Yeah. And so here she is doing what she's been instructed to do and what any of us would try to do is to get our friend to the medical emergency resource and he dies. So
I can't even imagine going through that because the first thing she thought was, did in pulling him out, did that kill him, right?
right, right.
And like you just said, the mission was to get him to the ER, and she had to go in and
Mhm.
to try to get him into the carrier. Then she thought, should I have taken him earlier? I was supposed to take care of him. Now he has died. I mean, she just went through so much. Um, and she became very, very obviously overwhelmed. Um, so what she did, your cat, Esme's trying to get in.
Can
Okay.
you hear her?
Yes, I can hear Esme. Okay.
She's in the next room. If she gets in, she'll jump all over my microphone and
I can hear
computers. She
her.
desperately wants to be in here.
So because also Michelle was alone, she lived alone with Tom. What happened is she shut down, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes it's so overwhelming that she stopped. She just put those feelings, she repressed them. She just became numb, right?
Yeah, and she's as you said, she's written to us a couple times. We've exchanged communications with her, and she writes about how hard it is even to do that, to communicate about him, to put her thoughts down because it just brings all the feelings and the pain and all of that. Which
So it took her about 5 months. Now, what kicked it into her writing to us, actually, it wasn't initially when Tom died, but it was 5 months after when she moved.
yeah, she
So
left
she
where they
moved
had lived
into a new
together.
place and she left the place where she had been living with Tom, and it came back. And
Yeah.
so it overwhelmed her and then set her back into these all of these grieving feelings that overtook.
Yeah, and I guess the point that I think is perhaps most important for people listening to this story to grasp is that grief has its own time
Time frame.
frame and it can go on for a lot longer than we would imagine. whether there's circumstances like this or circumstances that feel less intense in terms of the way the loss happened, the way the death happened. And we have to just allow for it.
Right.
It's not, there's nothing wrong. It's not pathological.
No, no.
This is just the story that she's living through. And for many people, we had people who would come to our support meeting literally for a span of years.
Oh, yes. We had Diane. Remember, Diane came for
Yeah,
5 years.
years.
People were looking at us like, "How? What's the matter with her?" Right? I mean, why is she still coming so long? Listen, she had a disabled husband, I believe. She
Mhm,
was kind of alone, and she had had the 3rd dog. I think it was the 3rd dog in a short period of time that had died within a year.
mhm.
And she got a lot of support. That
She
was
got a lot of support, which is and that tells you that a group context can be really supportive. And that was an extreme situation,
yes, it was very
and most people wouldn't, that was extraordinary. But the point is, if you can use support, if it'll help you, there's no downside to that. It's not like there's
no.
anything wrong with that. But it punctuates the idea that grief really becomes the loss that we experience. We have to ultimately integrate that experience of loss into the story that we tell ourselves and that we understand of our lives.
Right.
And it doesn't, it isn't the case that we come back to where we were before the loss. We come to
Yes.
a new experience of
We
ourselves, a
have
new
to integrate.
experience,
Right. We
right?
have
A
to
new experience.
integrate that loss
Yeah.
into our life. Because as we all know, we never forget
Yeah.
those that we love so dearly, our beloved animals. We don't forget them. I mean, they're always with us, but we have to learn how to live without them physically.
And the way I think about this is for somebody like Michelle writing about it, whether she's writing a note to us or writing in a journal or writing to friends and just talking about it, is probably going to be part of her healing work.
Exactly.
And the thing that I always think it's important to say, and hopefully that she she'll hear this, and we've communicated this in the communications we've had with her, is that there will come a time where this hurts less.
Mhm.
And there will come a time where she can remember her friend Tom in a way that is not so terribly painful. I mean, there might also always be a little bit of a pang
Mhm.
of the experience of loss in it, just as there is for all of the loved ones who we've lost, whether they're pets or whether they're human family members. It's just part of the experience of living and going forward in life.
Well, I love some of I use some of her quotes, that she, kind of shared with us the last time that she contacted us. "I would do anything to hold him again."
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Um, "I loved him more than I have loved anything in the world." And what would happen is the grief, when it would come over her, would be kind of triggered by anxiety and stress. So that it would create, more of an intensive grieving process. It's interesting because sometimes, like we were talking about that process for her, there was a period of time she couldn't think about it. That was her journey,
Right.
right? When she moved, then it all came back again. And now she's really going through it. Um,
Which also points out something that's very common, which is when we encounter a change, it often will bring up, because a change always involves loss,
yes,
even if it's a welcome change, even if we're moving and we're happy about where we're moving, we're losing
that's right.
everything that was familiar in that home. And in her case, it was the home that she shared with Tom. And so it would make absolute sense that it would bring up all the feelings that she had about Tom and about his death. And that happens to people when we have any kind of change. And it can be things like the birthday of our pet,
Mhm.
the date of adoption. It can be holidays. It can be the
The
change of
anniversary of the death.
the anniversary of the death, the change of seasons.
Yeah.
Many, many different things can bring, many changes can bring about a reawakening
A
of
song.
yeah, yeah, those kind of triggers. And the we just live forward with it, right? We just keep going, we keep taking our steps forward.
Mhm. And for Michelle especially, it was a traumatic death. I mean, obviously, and
Yes.
she was
Yeah.
extremely that's why I think she had to shut down for a period of time.
Yeah.
You see that with other situations with people, that have other issues or other impending or more difficult issues in their lives to begin with when that beloved animal dies. So a move, like, they've got to move that next week, or they're changing a job, or a family member has become ill. I mean, sometimes we have a lot of things that we need to deal with at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
The other part of that is sometimes, and this is what happened with Diane, is she had 3 deaths in 1 year, I believe.
Yeah.
And so she wasn't even done grieving with the first one when the second one died, and then the third one died.
Yep.
And so I don't want to talk about that later on in the podcast or at the end. But so how do you work with that,
Mhm.
right? Or what happens if you've had that third death and then your husband's in a car accident or your wife's I mean, our lives can be so disrupted that it's really difficult, and sometimes has to be put on hold.
Yeah. And people do this differently. Some people,
Yes. Mhm.
like Michelle, will put it aside for a while. Other people will be really working through all of those losses simultaneously. They'll be sort of in a bundle. And and for some people, they will work on it for a great deal of time because there is so much there. There's so much loss.
Mhm.
And all of that is just it's okay. It's painful, but that's just the path that you have to go through if you have that experience.
The hope is that folks will not use coping mechanisms that are harmful, which is unfortunately that happens,
It does happen a
um,
lot.
because they don't know what to do with these feelings. And so a lot of times there's an increase of use of substances. Unfortunately, that can cause another problem.
Mhm.
Um, or they isolate. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
you
so many
shut
things
down
that
ag
get
they
shut
shut
down,
down in other relationships.
right? And so again, our grieving is unique. And I sometimes wonder, like you and I would wonder, 3 or 4 things going on at the same time that are change and loss. You really wonder how people do it.
Mhm,
They get through it, but
mhm.
how do they get through it?
Yeah.
Sometimes
Well,
it's overwhelming.
one of the things I've heard people say is they have no idea how they get through it, they just keep going.
Well, yes. Well, you have no choice, right?
Which is part I mean, there's a certain part of most of us that just keeps doing life, and we manage, and then at some point, we feel less wrapped up in that pain and more able to reflect on what was great and valuable in that relationship. But
Yeah, it starts to switch.
how people get there, I mean, we've talked about some of the tools that you can use, and there are many, and many of them come down to just taking care of yourself the best you can.
Because a lot of us have responsibilities.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could have a loss, and then you've got to go home and take care of other pets that may be ill.
Yep.
You have to move forward, or it could be a family member that's ill, or it could be
Absolutely. It can be a family member. It can be the work that you have to do to sustain your
survival.
home and your life, and we have to we have to keep moving. And I do think that one of the things that it's just very important to sort of keep emphasizing is that closure is more of an experience
Mhm.
than an event. It's not like suddenly
Right.
at some point
Yeah,
your
it's not
grieving is
stop.
over. It's not like that. It's like we remember those who we've lost all the time. We may think about them every day or almost every day. And that's very typical and normal and I believe healthy, that we hang on to the remembrances, we hang on to the good feelings that we had in those relationships, and we are able to visit the pain of loss as well.
Mhm. It's important to go to, and that's the important part, to try to go through it the best way you can,
Mhm.
individualized, okay? The thing that I really also, um, she said that was that I can relate to, I think anyone with a beloved animal can relate to. My heart aches for him.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
was my son, like Moon.
Right.
Um, Meaning, she said, my world revolved around him, and he was the light of my life.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Very,
so
very central.
she could say those things, which was good for her because I think it brought him closer to her. Um,
Mhm.
she does sleep with his blanket, yeah,
Mhm.
every night.
Mhm. Yep.
Which, I mean, yes, it's important to have those things if that's what gives you comfort.
Yep. Some people will get something like a stuffed animal that replicates their pet
Mm,
because they, like her, had their cat or dog sleeping at the foot of their bed or at the head of their bed on the other pillow.
right.
And whatever works.
Hey, listen, yeah, people come in and say, "Well, this is what I'm doing." Fine. I mean, as long as it works,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you remember one of the gentlemen, you remember him, and he lost his dog died, and he put the ashes in the attic
Yeah.
above his bed,
Yep.
and he would talk to his dog every night,
Yep. And he
you
would
know,
look up, and that's where he
that
knew the dog. He located that dog's spirit there.
yeah,
At least that was a reference point for him.
yes. Whatever it takes. People think
Yeah.
I'm crazy. You can do as many rituals, memorials, or, whatever comforts you. It's fine. Grief is individual. And so now I do want to go into, though, and I didn't really share this with you before, but sometimes, and this is just more of a psychoeducational piece, there is complicated grief.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And, you know, um, what that means, though, is that through that process, there's more detachment and more numbness. Excuse me, the feelings aren't really being, you know, felt. They're kind of put, you're detached from those feelings or numb. There is intense sorrow, over the loss. There's problems accepting to death. Now, this is obviously into so many weeks and months of grieving. There's intense longing for a pet that has died, and there continues to be a feeling that you did something wrong. So that guilt is overwhelming. Okay. Um, so, I mean, that's just something to keep in mind for folks out there. If I think right now Michelle's really feeling it. And so she's dealing with her grief now. It may have been delayed somewhat, but she's dealing
Right.
with it. But the other thing that I think is really important that you and I have talked about is if it's been over a period of time and it's still pretty raw, then it's okay to get help and see somebody.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say that as you were talking, that if you're feeling in any way impaired
Mhm.
significantly by your grief, like you are feeling like you can't function in the ways that you would generally, you're not able to get yourself out of bed. You're not able to get yourself ready for the activities of the day through doing your showering and dressing. And you're not able to take care of any dependents who are
We live with you.
who you have responsibility for, you deserve to get help from a
Yeah,
therapist. It can't possibly hurt, and it will likely be helpful. And even if you are not having extraordinarily complicated grief, you may want to see a therapist just to talk through what you're going through.
exactly. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be
It's
in
never going to be an it's never going to make things worse.
right.
It can only help. And I
Yeah,
mean, in general, people don't need a therapist, but it certainly is something that some people will greatly benefit from, and some people do need.
and I know it's hard in some parts of the country or other countries to really be able to access someone who specializes in companion
Yeah,
animal
we're finding
loss,
that out more and more.
because grief counselors can be really good, or they can not necessarily understand the relationship with an animal.
Yep.
So, we have helped others, that have gotten in touch with us to try to locate somebody for them as best we can. Um, but that would be the best, or support groups, even if
Yep.
it's a Zoom group.
The Zoom
Um,
group. Yeah. Yep.
right. But we had, somebody else had written to us, just today, and I was thinking at some point we want to talk about a little more. We can't do it tonight, about multiple losses at
Yeah.
at a time, uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
This is
it
a
brought.
story that's, it's interesting. I used to tell people that I tried to stagger my pets
I know,
so they wouldn't all be at ready
the
to
same
leave this
time.
life at the
No,
same
Abigail
time.
and Isabel
But
died.
we didn't succeed with Abigail
I know.
because
I mean,
we had these 2 very elderly dogs, which
yeah,
is often the case because we want to have our pets have if we're gonna have more than one, we may want them to be friends, lifelong friends,
yeah,
and then we set up that situation where they get to that age where their
yeah.
lives are almost over, and then we lose them both, or
Well,
we
I
lose
mean,
more
and I
than
thought of
that.
you, but I also thought, I mean, we had the pack of pugs, right?
Yeah.
And Hank died in 2019, Rosie in 2020, Molly in 2021. And so it wasn't bunched up into months, it was still one a year.
Mhm.
Now, you know, and we have Jack still here, his daddy, and he's going to be 16 in April. I hope he makes it. But he's elderly. Ellie
Mhm.
is now kind of elderly. So yeah, I thought maybe we talk about that. I mean, at some other point. But we also have a guest next week, right?
We do. We have a veterinarian who is going to speak with us about the work she does, helping people come to terms with the loss of their pet and also helping people understand when their pet is signaling that they're
We're
ready
ready.
to leave. And so she'll tell us a lot of things that I think will be very interesting and helpful. And so yeah, we'll look forward to having her join us next week.
Dr. Joanne, right?
Dr. Joanne Lefebvre, if I'm saying
Yeah.
it correctly.
Good. So I think for people, that would be really helpful to actually talk to a veterinarian who does euthanasia work. I believe she has hospice work too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
she so we're very much looking forward to having her talk with us.
um, so please, tune in. Um, but we want to thank Michelle,
Yep,
for allowing us to tell her story.
yep,
And we will talk again about, these multiple losses, and really how to deal with them.
yep. Okay, Nancy, great talking with you as always. Have a
Yes.
good week.
Have a wonderful week too, Ken. Take care, everyone.
Yep. Bye-bye.